Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm welcoming you to the webinar on the keys to a peaceful and prosperous Africa. Thanks for being here. I am Ricarda Mocilnik. I am the Policy and Advocacy Officer of the International Council for Adult Education, and I will be guiding us through this 1 hour maximum webinar. And as there are a lot of participants from different time zones and not everybody is also able to join live, we are recording this webinar. So I hope this is okay for everybody of you. And also afterwards, you have the possibility to share this webinar and disseminate it. So this webinar is organized by the International Council for Adult Education and DVV International. The International Council for Adult Education is a global network. It's advocating for youth and adult learning and education. It was already created in 1973. 7 regional bodies. We are actually representing more than 800 NGOs. And I will be typing our email address in the chat box. So in case you want to read up more, you can have a look at the website. So, and as already mentioned, this webinar takes place in the framework of a virtual seminar, which is organized yearly. And this year, it's still running until the end of March. The topic is the role and impact of adult education. So I know that quite a lot of you have already joined the seminar. We had very interesting, very inspiring, enriching conversations already. So you can read up the conversations we had so far on our dedicated website, which I'm posting now. And if you still want to receive emails and be virtually involved in this webinar, you can, or this virtual seminar, you can register here. So I've posted all the links in the chat box. So, and this virtual seminar is based on 4 articles from the DVV International Journal on Adult Education and Development. And one of the articles is actually, or comments, is from Samuel Asnake Wollie. He speaks about the keys to a peaceful and prosperous Africa, and he will be presenting this column to us today and discussing this together with Shirley Walters and with you, of course. So just before I introduce Samuel, I'm inviting you to write your questions and comments to Samuel in the chat box. I will be collecting these ideas, these questions you have to the 2 presenters and will be transferring to them. I will collect them. So please just get involved through the chat box. Any thoughts, ideas you're having? So let me introduce Samuel. Samuel is the Chief Education Program Coordinator of the UNESCO Liaison Office in Addis Ababa. So he's based in Ethiopia. So he has a very in-depth understanding what Ethiopians' education policies, strategies, and programs are about. In the past, he was also a coordinator of the Education, Literacy, and Capacity Building Education for All program in South Sudan. It's also with UNESCO. He's a very experienced teacher, trainer, and facilitator. And of course, he also has a lot of publications done already. He's board member of the Adult and Non-Formal Education Association in Ethiopia and associate member of the Ethiopian Economic Association. So, if I've forgotten anything, Samuel, you can add, of course.
Oh, that's sufficient. Thank you, Ricarda.
So I will share your PowerPoint now and hand over to you.
All right. All right. Thank you, colleagues. Good afternoon. First of all, I'm so grateful for International Council for Adult Education and DVV International, first to give me this opportunity and also publish my article, a very brief one. So let me just make to the first, maybe Ricarda, you have to move to the first, yes. This title, I'm just titling Key to Peaceful and Prosperous Africa. This is a point, move please. Move second. Yeah, this is the basis for which I'm just making, because Africa is now on a very aspiration to 2063, where the continent aspires to an integrated, peaceful, prosperous Africa, driven by its own citizens, taken up in rightful place to global arena. And with this vision, the continental education strategy for Africa just really anchors on development of competent human resource to achieve the vision of Africa Union. And the continental education strategy for Africa, as we can see from the slide, particularly strategic objective 6, specifically discusses effective literacy program across the continent to eradicate the scourge of illiteracy. So in general, whenever we see education is central to African Union vision, the CISA, also many countries in Africa. Move, Ricardo. So with this understanding, if we are just making, because African Union have moved for the last 50 years, and also now designing a vision to 2063 for another 50 years, but the issue of education, particularly literacy, has been named, but not really making to an asset for this development endeavor. So my question in this article, I raise 3 questions. 1, are there key literacy learning programs contributing to peaceful and prosperous Africa? Because the issue of peace is very, very serious in the case of many parts of the African continent, in particular in the Horn of Africa, and there are good signs, but still the issue of peace, education, literacy, and helping to social cohesion is very, very important, but that is not a point. So the second point, do the social, economic, and cultural changes are liabilities or assets in terms of real national and continental unity and sustainable development? I have obtained a number of comments pro and against, because in the case, when I say it is liabilities, I'm just referring how we are just getting a return from investment on education in Africa. Because the issue of education, the issue of making, there is no doubt, education is an engine for social development. Education is an engine for sustainable development and social transformation. But the reality in many parts of the African countries, in communities, this doesn't really show the reality. Of course, we can just name, I have already made some points, the issue of migration, the issue of unemployment, the issue of really eroded social capital, all these confusions really question to what type of point should we use as a key to prosperous Africa. And the third question I just make is how to transform a liability. In my case, a liability are the investment in education, particularly the investment on literacy in the context of Africa, is not really making an added value the way we need, or the way the Africa envisions to have lifelong learning and education in continue. With this point, move, Ricardo, move. Move, yes. This is a few observations, which against our vision 2063. Imagine, let me just make some observations. Globally, there are still 750 million people who lack basic literacy around the world, whom 2/3 are girls and women in Africa. And this proportion is unchanged since 2000 European calendar. For the last 18 years, now we're just 19 years, this proportion of just being disadvantaged is still in continue. The second very interesting observation is, according to UNESCO, Africa loses around 402 million USD due to illiteracy. So the investments and the others are not just making to a functional literacy, although there are efforts on basic structure and the others. And another observation is between 1960 to 2010, Africa's working age population, that means 15 to 49, doubled 4 times. but responsive literacy policies and effective literacy learning programs are lacking in many African countries. And this is a serious issue because Africa is a young population, dominated by a young population being up to 70% of the population. So in this case, what literacy programs can contribute to an asset for the transformation of Africa? And another is the return on investment of formal schooling is tending to observable liabilities, predisposing to challenges of unemployment, migration, conflicts, as well as terrorism. This may be, I have seen a number of comments pro and against. Still, I argue that if education is meant for social cohesion, social capital, social development, why all this been increasing, escalating in Africa is a question. And the Vision 2063, where Sustainable Development Goal 4 and the notion leave no one behind on all the aspiration are under serious challenge because there are still, due to formal learning, there are still disparities. There are no equities for literacy access and such issues. Continue. Move. So some of my arguments in that article are the following. One, no doubt literacy is a basic right and a key asset that opens the floodgates of an ocean of wisdom in context. This is no argument, but what type of literacy in context are we aspiring for Africa? Are we implementing for Africa? Are we still looking for the alphanumeric? Are we still looking for the literate and the illiterate dichotomy? And what type of, where is the social capital and where is making the indigenous knowledge system? The second is, in the context of Africa, the unilateral schooling alone neither is a key to break a cycle of poverty, nor an answer to the lofty aspiration of Africa we want. Because the investment on schooling, along with the technology and the others in Africa context is still a challenge because we are not getting that return on investment on schooling. So education is not only schooling, so we have to go for other options of flexible, responsive literacy programs on the communities. And in order to change liabilities into assets, in this, I understand, or I mean, the assets are where we are just making an added value due to literacy, due to functional literacy and empowerment to the learners and invest on viable and responsive systems for multiple literacies in continuum shall be the top development priorities of Africa. I'm just making about the literacy system, the literacy conceptualization and practice of literacy in multi-context, multi-ethnic, and in diversified economy way. Next. So my conclusion is the following. For the last 50 years, also in the coming 50 years, unless we really look for another way of, an inclusive way of a functional literacy way, schooling alone may not make Africa to be in a place as it's aspired. So the issue, my conclusion remark is, the keys for integrated, peaceful, and prosperous Africa are nothing but investing on efficient and effective multiple functional literacies fetched from the daily lives of and driven by the learners towards fulfilling the common development aspiration. So in this case, I'm just anchoring one. We need to have a multiple functional literacies, not only a unilateral literacy. The second is the learners themselves must be at the center of the program. And the third is peaceful and prosperous Africa cannot come from void, but we have to do on multiple literacies on the community levels. I thank you, colleagues. If you have any question, please.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Thanks for this very interesting input and your further elaborations of your article. Before I hand over to Shirley to respond and comment and elaborate further, I'm having a look in the chat box if there are already some questions from you, from the other participants. Currently, I don't see any, but Adnan, yes. Adnan Keskic, could you please type your question into the chat box? Just give him a second to type this question in, and also the others have now the opportunity just or express your thoughts. What came to your mind listening to Samuel? Can you relate to this? Do you have experiences in the same way? So just one more second to see what Adnan's question is. Otherwise, it takes a little bit of time probably to formulate the question. Shirley, can I hand over to you? But before I would like to introduce you. As I already mentioned, Shirley is a very nice colleague in the framework of the International Council for Education. She's the Vice President for Africa there. She's a very ambitious social activist, adult educator. She's primarily also the founding director of the Division for Lifelong Learning at the University of Western Cape, South Africa. Additionally, the founding director of the Center for Adult and Continuing Education. So actually, since 1986, she has been a professor of adult and continuing education. She published very, very widely and a very wide range of issues, mainly regarding gender, popular education, community education, lifelong learning in higher education, learning regions, and education for democracy. As mentioned, she's a social activist involved very deeply with civil society organizations which are working in social justice issues and in the promotion of lifelong learning. So, yes, Shirley, may I ask you to comment and extend the discussion which Samuel started?
Thanks, Ricardo. And I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for being here. And to thank Samuel for his provocative presentation. It is based on a very short article, so I recognize that you haven't had the opportunity to really expand your views fully. So I'm going to just start by asking a couple of questions of clarification and then provide something of my own analysis, perhaps to also be provocative. What's not clear to me is really how you are defining or thinking about the meaning of literacy. So it would be helpful to have that expanded. I would also I would be intrigued to know more about your understanding of what a, in quotes, peaceful and prosperous Africa looks like. So in a way, what is your alternative vision for Africa? Thirdly, what are the fundamental problems in Africa and what are their causes? Because if we don't have agreement on the causes of the socioeconomic and ecological crises we are facing, it's, I think, impossible to talk about the so-called keys to their resolution. So it's about really an argument for what the underlying causes are. My own understanding of the widespread poverty, violence, environmental degradation, gender inequalities relate to the histories of Africa. And I'll point to some of the major ones which relate to slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and patriarchy. That continue in different forms today. These are linked to the capitalist economic system, which sees exploitation of Africa for the enrichment of other nations, corporations, and groups. Now, I just want to take one example that I was thinking about and hearing about just yesterday. If you look at the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it's an immensely resource-rich country with about 70% of all cobalt deposits globally. It also has ongoing wars, extreme violence, and mass poverty. The sexual violence is just too awful to contemplate. Now, cobalt, this is just an example. Cobalt is essential for much of the mobile technologies that we are currently using and enjoying. The conditions in the cobalt mines are apparently appalling. Artisanal mining is allowed where individuals as young as 9-year-old children are attempting to retrieve it. They are given paltry sums of money for their efforts, which are life-threatening, by the Chinese, the Americans, and everyone else. There are army militia or warlords guarding these mines so that all of us who use smartphones are in some way complicit with what is happening in the DRC and the cobalt mines. This is just one example of mining operations that are all over Africa. So the question is, how can we stop the extreme exploitation of people and natural resources? So while I agree that literacy, in inverted commas, in its multiple senses, and thinking about Paulo Freire's reading the word and reading the world in order to change it, is one important dimension of what is needed in Africa. This would need to be undertaken with an analysis of the socioeconomic and political conditions. Also, the development of an alternative vision for a more equal, environmentally sustainable continent and planet. From all the data that has been forthcoming in the last few months and years about the abysmal state of the planet, we cannot buy into a future that is based on the economic system that we currently have. A key for adult educators is to engage with possible alternatives and become literate in alternative economic systems and how to move from where we are to where we want to be. My final point is the poorest people, many of whom are in Africa, will suffer the most with the accelerated global warming and climate change. In Southern Africa, I know we are a climate hotspot. This means that if the world were to warm by 1.5 degrees, we will warm by 3 degrees, with devastating consequences for food security and livelihoods. The Secretary General of the UN, in response to the recent panel report on climate change, says that we have 12 years if we are going to avoid catastrophe. We have no time to lose. We all need environmental literacy, economic literacy, and many other kinds of literacy if we are to survive as a species in ways which provide for so-called peace and prosperity, however we might define these. So it feels that tomorrow is young people around the world are marching for the future and to make people conscious of the catastrophe that's unfolding before us. So I would like us to think about this conversation in that broader context as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Before I ask Samuel to respond to Shirley, because there were a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts included in your comment, I will now read out Adnan's question. Adnan writes that he did some research to inform himself and came up that besides English, which is the educational language, he thinks over 80 other languages in Ethiopia. So is there a thought about institutionalizing the native languages in order to preserve the linguistic and cultural heritage of Ethiopia? So it's a question referring to language in your country.
All right. Okay, well taken. May I respond to that? May I respond to Adnan's question?
Yes, please do.
All right. Yeah, Professor Shirley, thank you. Thank you, all colleagues. I think I may not get all the answers, but this is a discussion provocating, and I welcome all. Let me start from Adnan. Thank you, Adnan, on the language issue. I think before I treat the language issue, I think we have to come to the education philosophy and the education policy in Africa as a continent, in many countries in Africa continent. As you know, Ethiopia has a peculiar feature in this case because many of the countries have already taken the language of the colonials to be as instructional language or a medium of instruction. But when it comes to Ethiopia, this was not the case, maybe one of the official language. Be aware that we don't have national language that is official working language, which is Amharic, came out of 85 or more language in the country to be a working language, also an instructional language, in addition to one international language and one mother tongue. This is the point. So, in principle, are you listening to me, colleagues?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear
you. Yes. Yeah. In principle, every child, as UNESCO advocates and many been supported by research, a child has the right to learn the basic education in his mother or her mother tongue. But the issue is maybe in order to make an instructional medium of instruction, a language should really undergo its maturity level. Script should be there, and teachers should be there, written material should be there. So in Ethiopian context, such conditions are matured for around 42 languages, and for the rest, it's not in point because the script issue and the language and the trainers are not in place. So this has been already taken as the one on their choice. Okay, that is an informed choice based on the social capital. But the point, having all this, now I will just come back again, re-question this point from the very philosophy point of view and economics point of view. Many parents now asking the government, including UNESCO, so let us not learn this because this is not a marketing language. So let us learn English or French other than the mother tongue. While the right is there, people are now associating education not only from the access point of view, also from investment on the return. In this case, maybe it really requires an additional exploration and an additional point. The second point is, in an Ethiopian context, as the policy says, a child needs to learn one international language, which is English in Ethiopian context, then his or her mother tongue, if it is a script and making, or a choice of the community, and another point of the national language, which is Amharic. So in this case, at what grade level should we start that point is also a question. And I will be very grateful if you have that study and the other, because the country is under a reform, a curriculum reform. I mean, the issue of language is highly sensitive, political. And then if you have very good recommendation, maybe I can really share to the government, and you welcome on that point to give your points.
Thank you so much, Samuel, and I hope, sure, yes, you responded to Adnan very well. And yes, I'm inviting all the other participants to write their questions in the chat box as well. And now maybe you would like to respond to Shirley's questions. There were quite a few.
Thank you so much.
Want to start
Yeah, I am sure, Professor Shirley, you are not examining me because you are just giving me a point of discussion to really expand our thoughts and really generate insights on that point. Thank you so much. And let me just start with peaceful and prosperous Africa. This is the vision of African Union, which they already stated by 2063, where Africa will be peaceful, prosperous, integrated, and where a rule of law and all rights have been instated on, and all its citizens enjoy the rule of law and peaceful and prosperous life, happy life. Okay, this is a very lofty aspiration. And in this case, maybe when you come to a very point of peaceful, for instance, and a very local communities, a peaceful is where they are secured of their own property, where they are secured of their own culture, where they have the right to really no violence and just respect and mutual coordination and cohesion. A peaceful condition for instance, in Ethiopian lowland and in Afar or Somali may be its own priority to the Highlander. But in any case, peaceful and prosperous restores that people ensure a rule of law, mutuality, social cohesion, and happy life. In this case, maybe there is also a point of integration. Okay, there are now signs of really divisions, and African Union is looking for integrated Africa, a coherent Africa, a prosperous Africa. And in this case, now I will come to the definition of literacy. Having this point on having this idea of just aspiration, where we can just look, is literacy alone about reading and writing? Of course not. That's why I'm arguing that we have to really redefine, recontextualize, and really customize the very value-adding literacy for Africa within its aspirations. So in this case, maybe I'm saying that it's not only one literacy, there will not be multiple literacies. A rural community people are highly literate on the way of medical herb. On the way they have to just making on traditional farming in the other. They have their own values, they have their own literacy skills. And we have to really appreciate and we have to cultivate from the source. That's why I'm saying we have to have multiple literacy. So in this definition, a literacy which help to a prosperous, integrated, and peaceful Africa, right from the communities. A very challenging question to me is, what are the fundamental problems and causes for Africa and what is the solution? Professor Shirley, this is maybe a huge question which many researchers, many scholars are still debating. There are a lot of school of thoughts on this case. Some radicals say that Africa's enemies are its own resources. Okay. Others say that it is a borrowed education system that is the enemy of Africa, and we have to come to our own source. Others say that the governance system and the leadership is the problem. So we can list a lot of things, but me, as a very naive expert on the area and focusing on literacy, I am saying that if we allow African people to really have a literacy on their own faith, on their own peace, on their own prosperity, on their own development, then we can really make Africa better place for its citizens. So I'm just looking for a one size to fit all solution, but I'm just arguing that let us have a multiple literacy programs where we empower the learners, the adults, the youth, so that we can just really get the solution. Another point is, you see, people are now saying that, okay, Africa is the future of the continent. That's of course true. there are resources. But I'm just telling from the Ethiopian context, you see. I am arguing that a good literacy program can support one, a good leadership can matter a difference. In Ethiopian context, the new prime minister, despite all the challenges and all the complications, he's now bringing a glimmer of hope. He's just giving of a horizon of hope for social cohesion, for tolerance, for coming together, and for peaceful dialogue. So now the point for we adult educators, how can we really cultivate such African way of making literacy a development wing for peaceful and prosperous Africa? Finally, I'm just questioning, because the very fundamental point was when adult education and development, DVV International is supporting Africa. And there are arguments where now it is a time to stop adult education program in Africa. But I'm arguing, but it is now the time even, because it is now the time where we can really help the youth, the women, adults, the elderly, really to engage on their own peace, prosperous journey. Thank you, Professor Shirley.
Thank you.
Thanks to Samuel. Shirley, do you want to respond before I include Rika's question? Shirley, do you want to respond to Samuel?
I think that I'm certainly acknowledging that the causes of the problems of Africa are multiple and complex, and there are many libraries full of books and analyses over what the causes are. But I think if we don't see the African continent as integral to global capitalism, we're losing our way. The fact that so many people, different countries, China is the latest one, but so many countries have been taking over many of our resources and so on over so much time. Unless we start to grapple with that reality, I think we can be seen as being quite naive. I think I absolutely agree that the time for adult learning and education is of course it's now, but I wouldn't link it only to a narrow sense, and I know you're talking about multiple literacies, but I think we have to take into consideration the need for alternative visions and the need to actually extricate ourselves from the kind of global economic system that is where we are being extremely exploited. So I don't think we can deal with literacy as something outside of our socio-political and economic and ecological context. So I would urge that adult learning and education must take these issues into account front and center. Otherwise, we're going to be having the same, we might not be here to have the debates in 50 years' time.
That's right.
Thank you. Yes, and also in a similar direction goes the comment and question from Rakat. Her name is Rakat Soldoshalyeva. Sorry, it's a very complicated name. Despite being unwell, she's listening to your presentation and on the recent article, and she thanks you very much for your arguments. And although she fully agrees with the points related to the need for multiliteracies or literacy for wider purposes, she thinks that there is a neglect in the development of quality instructional strategies and the training of educators and helping adults and youth to acquire the basic literacy skills that are based on recent scientific findings on learning and reading and writing. And she elaborates further. How is this issue of quality instruction for early adult readers being dealt with in Africa? So are there any concerted and collective efforts that address this issue of adult literacy at universities in Africa? And she feels that we need to also address specific issues within adult literacy provision as such. So we should refer very much to the training and quality instruction for adult readers and early adult readers in Africa. Should I read out the question again, or is it okay for you?
No, that's okay. That's okay. I think, thank you, Rakat. Thank you, colleagues. I think I fully agree with Professor Shirley's point. Let us start with the very philosophy of education, adult education and literacy and lifelong learning in Africa. You see, that point really will give us a way in order to redesign, re-argue on the point. And Rakat's point is very important. And I personally, because this requires a number of research work, but from my observation, for instance, in Ethiopia, there are 10 universities that offer adult education program in various forms. For instance, in community development, in lifelong learning, in urban development, and the others, all this. But the very important point is now, these programs are highly dominated by the formal schooling and the very rigid way of thinking. And now the point is, what type of instructional material are most convenient for adults? And how can we just make those instructional material still, and on some in Ethiopia, maybe other colleagues from the rest of the world can help me. In Ethiopian context, there is still a tendency of making textbooks, rigid instructional materials, and curriculum that will be flow from the center, from the federal to the, also we are saying that there is federal or decentralized system. So the very mindset and attitude, I repeat this one, the mindset and attitude of the adult educators, also the institutions and the material developers matters. And we have to really work on that area, how we should make on that point. That's why I'm saying that, are we just making for a certificate matter? Are we doing literacy program for the sake of certificate, for the sake of completion, for the sake of really having a level 1 to level 2, or are we helping the communities to empower themselves, to look their problems and to seek for their own on the solution side? Because with this point, my argument is, we are investing a lot of money. For instance, Ethiopia, which I know very well, invests like 25% of its GDP on schooling. But whenever you see the very important indicators, the learning competencies, and also the learner's confidence at the graduation level is declining. Now the question is, if you are investing a lot, why the return becomes declining? So this point will give you that we have to give alternative ways, alternative approaches, even for the schooling. And in this case, I think that's why I'm just kindly asking the DVV International to think differently, to think out of the box, and to really work on the multiple literacy programs where the communities can engage, while really acknowledging Professor Shirley's point, where we should just really make, how we just make from the elaborated Africa, maybe elaborated from the conception of the philosophy of education, the westernized education, and the other. Maybe let me add one provocative question, because while we are just saying Africa we want, an integrated and prosperous Africa, many people are now, there is high brain drain. There is a selective harvest of cultivating brain on the West, so that people are just really migrating, and Africa is losing it is cultivated brain. And then where do there's the schooling? Are we just schooling for the West or for the Africans? That is also a question on this point. But African governments are spending a lot of money, but the educated, the very brilliant, the scientists, the professors are already migrating. So where is the point where we can just really realize the Africa we want? So in this case, Rakat's point is very important, but we should reorient, redefine, and research to really make that happen. Thank you. Thank you.
Mats in.
Hello. 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 Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It seems that the connection
Starting to crack.
Nice back. I'm online. I'm listening. Shirley, hello.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah. I'm listening to you. Yes. Yeah.
Am I talking? I'm not sure. We've lost Ricardo.
Ricardo, yeah. Sorry.
We've lost our leader. What are we going to do?
So we have to wait until the leader back. Eh?
I see a question from Mats here.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Which says, what kinds of actors in civil society and what kind of institutions can we identify that can make literacy in all its dimensions a reality?
Yeah.
So that's a really important question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to find a response to that, Samuel.
Yeah, Professor Shirley, maybe I think I kindly ask you to help me on this point. But for literacy, I'm more from the observation we have in Ethiopia. Maybe the literacy should really come from the communities. We have to really make more flexible, more responsive literacy programs that will just make on that. In this case, maybe we have to encourage the civil society, also including the religious institutions who are just working at the grassroots level. That will give you a complete picture. So a contextualized, responsive, and community-owned literacy learning programs perhaps may be more helpful, while the government is looking for the major ones of like standard setting, supporting infrastructure and other facilities, including technology. Because from the observation I have in Ethiopia, there is the integrated functional adult education program that is owned by the government. And the government really struggling to set the curriculum, to have the facilitators training, the materials development, and all the stuffs that a literacy program should require. But in a very big country like Ethiopia, where there are 110 million people, and there are a majority are functionally illiterate, and a number of landscapes culturally, ethnically, and that, can a government reach and can it make it happen with a short period of time is a question. Because in the last 10 years, the government reported it reached only 10% of its initial plan. So in this case, we have to really reorient where the communities can really make. Otherwise, we are really widening the gap. We are widening the inequalities. So in this case, I'm so grateful for Matt to really really look this civil society. And when we do the civil society, maybe let me just come from the African point of view, there are also the issue of politics. Because until recently in Ethiopia, the civil societies were not allowed to really engage on such points except for support and immediate donation and other aspects, because the government says that we are the one that really cultivate such thoughts and perceptions of the communities. So this engagement, acknowledgement of the civil societies by the government is also a point, and giving them the way to work and to facilitate, to accelerate literacy programs is also another point. But we are not talking about a literacy alone where reading and writing is a prerequisite. We are talking about a multiple responsive, flexible literacy programs where communities really prioritize and engage on their own literacy programs, where the support of the government help to their standard.
I think that sorry, Ricardo, are you back?
I am back, yes.
Oh, good, okay.
Good.
We were just carrying on without you.
That's good. Obviously, you don't need me. Thank you so much. I could hear that Samuel has already responded to our kind colleague's Matt's question. Are there any other questions, actually, which I haven't?
One by Lucas.
Yes, can you maybe read it out for me?
Yeah.
Because I can't.
First of all, I would like to thank both of you for supporting us with your visions and knowledge. Don't get me wrong, somehow I am currently feeling a bit like Marty McFly during his multiple adventures in Back to the Future. Our discussions seem to have already taken place so many times over the last decades. As far as the dependence theory has already come up with the urge for a paradigm shift. The real question should be, why haven't we globally not been able to eradicate our poverty illiteracy? Why has it become perennial in many African nations despite all efforts at curbing the menace? According to my opinion, it is time for smaller steps. Political change set goals over many decades, which is truly hard to realize. Smaller goals, smaller steps. As we all know, in adult education, individuals need time to improve on an individual point of view. And I'd quite like to just respond, if I might, or just to pick up some elements of it, which I also picked up from Samuel's paper, and is that critically, as we know as adult educators, you only make progress when you connect to what really matters to people. And that might differ in different communities, in different places. We have to connect to what matters to people. So I think that the point, I think embedded in Lucas's point is very much that it does feel like we hamsters going on around the same wheel again and again and again. And I think one of the questions I've asked myself over 4 decades is, why don't we have some of the millions and millions of people who we know can't read and write?
Right.
Why aren't they marching in the streets asking for it? Now, the fact that they aren't doing it is, I mean, it's a complicated question to answer. But somewhere the way that we're approaching it is missing the mark. And I think that unless we are connecting to people's sustainable livelihoods, the idea of people's deep concerns, nothing is going to work. But I at the same time think, given the ecological and the economic crises we're facing, we actually also need to educate people about what the current situation is. And we can't just go or build our programs based on what people know from their own experience. One's also got to educate people to what the current state of the world is. So when farming practices can no longer be applied in particular areas, it's not the people's fault. It's because of rapid climate change and so on. So I think adult learning and education is an absolute essential. And the point that in the context of the SDGs, the fact that it's not being prioritized as much as it should is deeply worrying and should be worrying all of us. Because if adult learning and education is not a priority now, when will it ever be a priority?
When it to be, yeah. That's right.
Thank you so much, Shirley. And I actually think these are very good closing words. I think this is a lovely statement to wrap up our webinar today, also looking at the time. Just if anybody really has a burning question or something they really would like to add at the end of the session here. Otherwise, I thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you, Samuel, and you, Shirley, to be sharing your expertise and all your very valuable experiences with us here today. Just a few administrative words from my side before I might leave and pop out from this webinar again. I'm sorry for these technical problems. As I mentioned, this virtual seminar is also still running. It's running until the end of March. So you can still participate and comment on articles, also and receive these comments via email, or you can look it up on our dedicated website. I mentioned the DVV journal. And you can also subscribe to this journal, and I'm posting this subscription link in the chat box. And finally, there is a feedback form. We would be very, very glad to hear how you enjoyed the webinar, and of course, I'm very happy for any feedback in the sense of how we can improve. And Ruth also shared again the link to the journal. So the video will be disseminated, so you can share it. And yes, it's the only thing I can do now is thank you so much. Thanks to Shirley.
Thank you.
All the people.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
thank you
thanks,
so
Samuel.
much,
Thank
Professor
you,
Shirley.
Natasha.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks a lot.